nowadays don't get transferred out to anything higher than a level 2. But as part of being in a level 1 nursery, you also have to be able to stabilize infants who are sick, who are preterm, and are going to need to be transferred out. And sometimes that process can take a little longer than you might think. Level 2 really just goes more into being able to care for some of those preterm infants that are 32 to 34 or 35 weeks gestational age and weighing more than 1,500 grams. So anything less than 1,500 grams is what we call a very low birth weight baby. And that type of care is specifically geared towards level 3 and level 4. But again, with a level 2, you should be able to stabilize those infants that are less than 32 weeks or less than 1,500 grams and get them to a NICU if the situation should arise. And then level 3 and level 4, the big difference between level 3 and level 4, they're both considered NICUs. You're taking care of babies that are less than 32 weeks, less than 1,500 grams. But the big difference between the two is whether or not you have access or prompt access, which would be level 3 to pediatric surgeons and specialists, versus having them actually in-house all the time, which would allow you to be a level 4 NICU. Now this is some older data, I will admit. As you can see, the study was done back from 01 to 2010. And my suspicion is that if we were to look at these, this type of a study again, some of these numbers would have changed, and I'll get into that a little bit. And again, that's just my suspicion. But this is the most recent data that we kind of have on this topic. This was put in by the National Perinatal Information Center Quality Analytics Services and was published with the March of Dimes as well. They looked at almost 200,000 newborns that were delivered in the NPIC QAS hospitals, and how many of them were admitted to a specialty care nursery. Now, specialty care includes level 2. So this was any of these infants that were born that were admitted to either level 2, 3, or 4. And what's kind of interesting here is if you look less than 34-week gestational age babies, more than 90% of them were admitted to at least a level 2 care nursery. And you can see that those numbers start to drop significantly the closer you get to term until you get to 42 weeks and plus, and then there's actually another increase in the amount of babies that are getting admitted to at least a level 2 or higher nursery. If you look at this table here, this kind of is a good way to see how many of the babies are needing at least specialty care. And remember, I had those late preterm infants, the 34 to 36 week gestational age babies marked in red. It was 50% chance that those babies were going to at least need level 2 care. So that's almost a flip of a coin when you're seeing a late preterm baby that they're going to need something higher than level 1, which is really why you need to be cautious with these kiddos. What's also interesting is of these all either preterm or late preterm babies, more than 70% of them ended up in a NICU. So a very high chance that these babies are going to need more than just a level 2. And this is the part of the data that I think if we were to look at this again, being that it's almost 10 years old, of the term babies, 37 to 38 weeks and 39 to 41 weeks, it looks like 10.5 and 7.2% were admitted to at least a level 2. If they were admitted to specialty care, it was still a flip of the coin whether or not they ended up going to a NICU. So almost 50% of these babies also needed to go to a NICU. I don't think that we transfer that many babies out of level 2 into NICUs anymore, but that's just my own speculation. It would be interesting if they could look at this again. So one of the big things that I think is sort of unique to the rural care of newborns is whether or not you should be allowing these kiddos to be born in your allow babies to be born, that perhaps you would have had time to actually transfer mom out before she was going to give birth to the baby and allow that kiddo to be born in a hospital that has the resources that are going to be needed for him. Part of that I have is working with your OB providers. As some of you and most of you probably know, a lot of the compensation for obstetrical care is kind of global, or some people would refer to it as bundling. meaning that you can be an obstetrician or a family medicine doctor taking care of a pregnancy, care for that mom for the full 9 months, and then if baby is delivered outside of your hospital or not under your care, you actually don't get compensated for that at all. Now, compensation should never be really a consideration into whether or not you're going to take care of a mom and a baby. You should be letting mom have that baby wherever she needs to have the baby to be safest and where the baby will be the best taken care of. But there have been instances that I'm aware of, at least, where, you know, maybe the OB's like, yeah, I know she's only 35 weeks, but she's in labor and we're going to go ahead and deliver this kiddo that we are expecting to have some complications. And then without a doubt, the baby ends up getting flown out with the, you know, intubated, flown out on a ventilator. And that's really just not safe for baby. If there's a chance and the opportunity to transfer mom before baby is born, then I would recommend doing that if you are expecting that that kiddo is going to need specialty services. As part of that too, you know, in a rural hospital, some of these smaller hospitals, and currently in Silver City, our hospital is struggling a little bit with keeping the doors open, or whether or not to become a critical access hospital so that we can get different funding and getting rid of obstetrics as a specialty. And so there is a lot of pressure on these providers to make money for the hospital. And it's unfortunate that things like that get taken into consideration, but it's something that you have to be careful about. One of the biggest things in being in a rural area is really knowing your limitations. What are you able to accomplish? What resources do you have for that kiddo? And number one is being familiar with these different levels of care and what you're going to be able to provide for them. You want to be confident yourself as the provider, because a lot of times in these scary situations, everyone's going to be looking at you to tell them what to do, or what are we going to do with this brand new little baby. So you want to be cognizant of the training that you have and what you're capable of doing. Like I said, even though we have a level 2 nursery, and I could manage some things in a level 2 nursery, there's enough things within that nursery that I wouldn't want to be the one to take care of. And so I defer that to the pediatricians at the hospital. You want to be cognizant of your ancillary staff, your nurses. How capable are they, and how much experience do they have in a nursery? Time and time again, I would say when a brand new baby is born and that baby requires resuscitation through the, you know, NRP protocols, the nurses are really the ones that can make or break that scenario. And we have some fantastic nurses that have been doing newborn care for a really long time, and it makes it easier for us as providers to have confidence that they know what they're doing and they're able to complete the tasks that need to be completed. If you don't have good nurses that are well trained or have the experience for this, then you need to be a little careful about what kind of babies are being born at your hospital. What equipment do you have on hand? This is something that we've run into a lot at our hospital with newborns. I had a baby that was in the nursery, hyperbilirubinemia and under lights for phototherapy, and had a baby come into clinic that needed to get readmitted to the hospital while this other kiddo was under the lights. And come to find out, we only had the one set of Billy lights. And so then it was a question of, how am I going to deal with this when I have 2 kids that need lights? And we had more lights in the past, and unbeknownst to me, some of them had broken down and no one had warned anyone about that. So little things like that come into play. Another one that we run into often is the ability to do an echocardiogram on a newborn baby if they have a murmur. So we currently have an echo machine with a probe that is appropriate for newborn echoes. We have a tech who is capable to do newborn echoes. However, we do not have a pediatric cardiologist that can read the echo. And I don't have a way to quickly get that echo report up to a pediatric cardiologist so that they could give us guidance on what to do with that kiddo. So in the end, is it really worth me even trying to get the echo, because I don't have anyone that can read it for me? And so those are the kind of things that we run into here from time to time with equipment. Another thing that you need to think about and know about is how far is your closest NICU, and how would you get them to the NICU if you need to transfer them. For us, we have a NICU up in Albuquerque that if you were to try and go by ground would be about 4.5 hours. By helicopter, it's probably about an hour and a half. And then if you put them on a fixed wing plane, the flight is only about 35, 40 minutes. However, the fixed wing plane can't land at the hospital, so they have to land at a nearby airport and then come over on an ambulance, get the kid, go back to the plane, and get up. So the whole process can take some time, and it's something that you need to be aware of. Because when a baby goes south or is having difficulty, and say you're intubating them, putting them on a ventilator, those kids can be very challenging, and the care that they need needs to happen pretty quickly most times. So something that you need to be aware of if you're going to be taking care of these infants in your hospital. When it comes to method of transfer after birth, I think this is something that's very important to look at as well. Obviously, you could go by ground. I can't tell you how many times when you tell mom and dad that you want to send baby to an outside hospital, and for us, whether that's Albuquerque or El Paso, they say, well, can't we just drive them? It's only 3 hours. Typically, if I'm transferring a baby out of my nursery, it's because he's not very stable. And really, I just don't want him in the back seat of the car without any medical professionals, even though, you know, mom and dad could easily take that drive. On an ambulance, you know, most of the ambulances that we have, you're dealing with just basic trained EMTs that have no specific training with a newborn in distress, and they don't have the equipment to take care of them either. So I really don't have a scenario where if I'm transferring a baby, I would feel comfortable with them being on an ambulance at all, just because there's not a provider on that bus to help transfer the kiddo. And then, so the more common ways for transport for us are either by helicopter and fixed wing. And the issue with helicopters is, one, they don't have the ability, at least the helicopters that come to our hospital, they can't carry the weight that a vent or an incubator would require, or they don't have enough room within the helicopter to actually fit it in there. And so helicopters really aren't a great way for us to transfer these babies unless they're not on a vent and they're not in an incubator, in which case, you know, they could potentially go on a helicopter. But again, the personnel training, these people that are working on the helicopters are not typically trained with neonatal issues. So I don't feel very comfortable. Usually if I'm having a kiddo that is unstable, I want someone there that has more experience with either intubating or managing a vent when it comes to newborn babies. And then helicopters can't go as far as the fixed wing planes, which for us usually isn't an issue depending on where we're flying them to. But sometimes we have had cases where we had to get a helicopter out of Tucson, and then they had to stop and get gas so that they could then go on to El Paso. And it's just something to be aware of. Typically, if I'm sending a newborn baby out of the hospital, I'm going to do it on a fixed wing plane. And the main reason for that is that they can carry the vent, they can carry the incubator, and they have usually either a nurse practitioner or a respiratory therapist that is trained specifically to deal with neonates. And it makes me feel a lot more comfortable knowing that baby is going to get to whichever hospital I'm trying to get them to. But again, there's a little bit of an increased time there because the fixed wing plane can't land at my hospital. So we still have to get him over to the plane on an ambulance. You want to think about how long it would take, you know, for the transfer, and depending on how stable baby is, if you think whether or not they're going to get there. It's called the PALS line, but we have a direct line to the neonatologist up at UNM in Albuquerque, and they've been excellent working with us. They understand our unique situation, and I've never had them, you know, turn us away or not give us the feedback that we needed after they took care of babies for us. So.
All right, well, let's move into the team activity. And for today's team activity, you were sent the case ahead of time. You were also given an assignment to find a critical access hospital near you. That's really easy for the folks in Corydon because they are a critical access hospital. Some of the rest of you maybe had to do a little research to find one. Our plan is for you to adopt one of the critical access hospitals that one of your team members has identified for the purpose of this case. So you just need to identify a small rural or critical access hospital in your region, and then use that in answering the case. So I'm going to give you, let's see, it is now, sorry. 10:34 our time. I'm going to give you about, we'll just say 5 minutes, because I really want to save some time for us to go back and forth, and Brandon and I will facilitate that discussion. So go to it. These are the questions that we would like you to answer with regard to the case, and then be prepared to tell us about your critical access hospital or small rural hospital, and address some of these questions. And if you could, as in other Rural Prep Grand Rounds events, if you could identify someone to be your spokesperson who's close to the microphone and can speak for you all, that would be great. A real case that Brandon dealt with, and it resonated with me because I had a case almost identical to this in my own practice. So I'm really interested to see how this might play out in Mississippi or Iowa or Washington State. So who wants to be first and tell us what you came up with? Just unmute yourselves and we'll go from there.
Hi, Gordon, Iowa again. Of course, the people that know what they're doing with this just had to leave to take care of a problem on the floor. But looking through this, we have two FP doctors that do point-of-care ultrasound with OB and also would look at the neonatal heart, and both of them have some training in this. So they would do point-of-care ultrasound, find out that there's something I would assume wrong with the heart, because just briefly talking to her before she left. And then probably transfer this for further or more formal ultrasound and care with a pediatric cardiologist.
And your pediatric cardiologist, the closest one is where?
be about by air 80 miles away in Des Moines, or then a little bit further in Iowa City.
Okay, excellent. Anybody else?
Before the next person talks, this is Kara, also from Wayne County Hospital. I'm an administrator and a nurse. And I just wanted to say we have our sister hospital is in Des Moines, Iowa, like Dr. Kermode said, about 80 hours away. And we did have but also having